Voice of Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the difference between thinking with 5 material senses and knowing with 7 spiritual senses. In this episode, we will explore the development of the faculty which takes us from following Jesus and letting him go and having the Christ reappear as the self of all being. Listen as we discuss what Mary Baker Eddy wrote in Principle and Practice. Christian Science is not a faith cure, and unless human faith be distinguished from scientific healing, Christian Science will again be lost from the practice of religion as it was soon after the period of our great master's scientific teaching and practice. End of the quote. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and demonstrate spiritual law. So the title of today's show is Visualization is Different than Spiritualization. What do we mean by those two words in this model?
Yeah, we definitely want to make that distinction because I think it's important what Mary Baker Eddy suggested here, that if we don't know the difference between human faith and scientific healing, her discovery will be lost. When you go back and you look at things like the tree of knowledge, the tree of good and evil, and the tree of life, back in Genesis, they're a good way to represent what we call in yoga, Ida, Pingala, and Shushumna, matter, mind, and spirit, or waking state, dream state, dreamless state. We could also call it unconscious awareness, self-conscious awareness, and superconscious awareness. They're ways to educate mortal thought up to what Mary Baker Eddy called spiritual apprehension. It becomes important to distinguish mental material thought from spiritual idea in order to prevent sin or ignorance. Sin is missing the mark, and ignorance is mistaking the impermanent for the permanent. I always think of what von Goethe said, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. It's so important for us to understand what our potential is and what it's going to look like when we're doing it.
Swami, let's go back just a second. You said sin is missing the mark. What exactly is the sin and what is the mark?
Yeah, when you go back to Genesis, it's simplified. If we eat from these trees, we are in the Garden of Eden. But if we eat from these trees, we're banished. If you notice, there's really no tolerance to that. It's an all or nothing venture. One bite of an apple from one of these trees, we're banished from the Garden of Eden. So if we unbox that and bring it into today's time and space reality, if we draw from duality, if we draw from this world, we miss the mark. If we sow to the flesh and not to the spirit, when you change your lines of demarcation from good and bad, which is where Orthodox religion left us, because what you learn is good and bad can also be temporary. with thought and belief, we can change finite bad to finite good. And so in yoga, they call the cycle of death and rebirth. We continue to make the same mistake. We're still drawing from the wrong energy field, fear and limitation, and trying to figure out why we are not experiencing truth and wholeness. So today we want to drill down with this concept of the difference between thinking with 5 corporeal senses and understanding what duality is, and then spirit, the unified state. And in the opening, where we said the difference between waking state, dream state, and dreamless state. If you are looking for direct experience with spirit, look at that cycle, because when consciousness is in the physical body, we experience what is called the waking state. And the waking state is dualistic because we know we have recollection from our experience with that dimension. The reason we have recollection from our experience with this is because it's dualistic. It's in half. It's not whole. This dynamic of separation creates contrast. Contrast enables our senses to perceive what's before them. When consciousness leaves the physical body, moves into the astral mental body, this is the sleep from which we return, where we have recollection, the dream state. We remember our dreams because the complementary unmanifested other part is also dualistic. It's in half. Now, when consciousness leaves the astral mental body, moves into the causal spiritual body, this is the sleep from which we return, where we have no recollection. It's the regenerative, the restorative, dreamless state. The reason we have no recollection is because there's no contrast. Consciousness has returned to unity. Spirit is one, it's whole, it's complete. And so now what we're learning is, in order for us to experience this dreamless state, we have to develop the faculty. In the Bible, it was called the Christ. In Revelations, they give us 7 steps where we graduate from person on earth to child of God.
So, Swami, let's begin. Let's start knowing the difference. Tell us about the difference between thinking with 5 material senses. What are they, and what does it look like when we do it? And then we'll talk about knowing with the 7 spiritual senses.
Karmic or material law is the hypnotic state. It's driven by the belief in 2 powers. And spiritual law is the belief in 1 power. Belief is the level playing field. We believe we're a finite mortal being. We experience waking state, dreamless state. The only self-existent power in this universe is spirit. We come into the difference between belief and truth, noumena and phenomena. Why we call belief a hypnotic state is because it borrows power from truth or spirit. Spirit is the only reality everywhere, always. Belief is this false sense of existence. Now, belief in the divine truth graduates into what is commonly called faith. Then faith graduates into understanding. There is this progression we can initiate by being a faithful witness to the divine creation. Mortal mind is belief, and divine mind is understanding, as Mary Baker Eddy tells us in Principle and Practice. So we learn, with thought and belief, we can change finite bad to finite good, but we are still under the law of karma. And as Jesus told us, know the truth and it makes you free. Knowing is another word for understanding. which then brings us back to progress, graduating from belief to faith to understanding. There's this process. This then liberates identity from karmic law. This is what he meant by know the truth and it makes you free. We graduate from being under karmic law, the belief in two powers, and now we understand ourselves to be spirit, experiencing ourselves in oneness, which is absolute goodness, eternal life.
So would you say it starts with what we see and hear and experience around us? We have to think differently about that and know the way in which we are truly created to really break this barrier of thinking to knowing?
Yeah, the best way to start doing this is to begin with the principle, to know the truth. This is where Orthodox religion really fell short because we don't know God aright. We think God is a mix of good and evil. We think God created this world, which is a mix of good and evil. Once you develop a value system that is in accordance with universal order, so we must know the truth at this mortal level of consciousness. And the beauty of this is you don't keep it at the level of belief, which again is where Orthodox religion leaves us off. We believe we are a finite mortal being and that we are going to expire. This doesn't prove out with the message of the Christ, which was the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's here, now, it's everywhere, always. We must be conscious of it. The thing that's missing is this idea of the faculty that enables us to perceive the truth, the Christ. Jesus gave us a clue when he said we must be born again of spirit. So we come in and we draw from duality. It's like Adam and Eve had the choice. They decided they were going to draw from the tree of good and evil. We are born in the tree of good and evil, from fear and limitation. We have to separate from our attachment to the outside world, duality, and then rejoin. That's what religion means, to relink. And of course, there's preparatory work that must be in place. Earlier religions had rituals, ceremonies, ordeals, ascetic practices. You have to purge the body of its dependency on particles and waves, and now prepare it for the inception of this invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence, born again of spirit. Now, you change the reward circuits in your brain. You are no longer looking for something from the outside world to produce the feeling in the false sense of existence, you're okay. Now you're drawing from truth and wholeness. And then like attracts like. It's not difficult, but it's very difficult when you try and do it without understanding one eternal spiritual being.
We're going to pause out here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So I'd like to get back to the statement from Jesus, know the truth, and it will make you free. Can we just maybe summarize a little bit? You talked about what knowing means, which is understanding, and the truth, I'm taking that to mean understanding God is all. There's only one. And the statement, and it will make you free, is that going to make us free from this mortal understanding of our existence?
Yeah, exactly what we're talking about. Know the truth. Like you said, the divine principle is all there is. Now, we also have to know it is absolute goodness without opposite. It's not a mix of good and evil. Without having that in place, you do not have a principle. In order to demonstrate divine law with scientific certainty, you need a principle and the rule. The principle is the divine omnipresence is perfect, everywhere, always. And the rule is like attracts like. In order for us to demonstrate divine law, we must be conscious of it. To know the truth, we need to think differently. We have to graduate from thinking with 5 corporeal senses to knowing with 7 spiritual senses. There's quite a bit of internal work that must be in place. The Bible used the term repent to imply thinking differently. But to think differently, I really like what Mary Baker Eddy called it, to think with God as God. For her, she uses the term prayer. Prayer for her is communion with the divine. This communion is the oneness. Just like Jesus said, I and the Father are one. Joel Goldsmith uses the term meditation. I like that because coming from a yoga background, meditation is defined as the 7th stage of yoga. The 5th stage of yoga is pratyahara, sense withdrawal. So we have to disconnect from the input from the 5 corporeal senses and then rejoin with the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence. Meditation isn't an isolated activity we do independent of life. It's a state of being one with the divine principle. So as you start to drill down with this and you uncover what is my responsibility in order to induce this God experience, because what you find is very few are demonstrating divine law, if any. My thinking is when Mary Baker Eddy was on the planet, the telephone was just coming out of the ground. The automobile was just coming out of the ground, but people knew all over the world about Christian Science. Now, today with communication the way it is, if there was somebody on the planet demonstrating divine law with scientific certainty, we would know about it within days.
So, how do we know the difference if we're thinking or if we're knowing?
Yeah, the difference between personal sense and self-realization, the belief in the many versus the understanding of the one. Like we said, thoughts are dualistic and in half. What we call rational. Idea is whole, complete, what we call absolute. We visualize with thoughts, and then we can spiritualize thoughts, which means we convert them back to the one. We can do this without contradiction by telling the truth about the appearance and telling the truth about the truth. What the Bible calls separating the wheat from the tares is how we begin to practice this principle. However, until you are born again of spirit, until you have this birth of Christ in consciousness, we are still working with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image. And so a big part of the preparatory work for having this inner event of graduating from sense to soul, we start with visualization. We start with working with the mind we know can't bring forth the divine image, but we're educating our thought up to spiritual apprehension. As we fill thought with spiritual idea, it becomes more buoyant, and we start to break the material moorings, the human concepts, theories, beliefs, keeping us attached to the wrong source of sustenance. We purify the mind-body complex. We purge it of all of our unnecessary dependencies. In doing this, we're not abstaining, but we are substituting. We're replacing what seems to be more important. For example, people that are using things visible and tangible to validate themselves can now start to use breath as your symbol for validation. Now, it's a lateral movement, however, but you're putting yourself in a position which will enable the vertical leap. Building this mental landscape, developing ourselves physically and mentally until we can now walk reason through the open door of revelation, where we graduate from thinking with these 5 corporeal senses to knowing with 7 spiritual senses.
So I have here a verse from the Bible. This is from Matthew 6:6. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. End of this verse. Swami, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the Father gives you in secret, for me, is code for spirit. Spirit gives spirit, not duality. There are no persons, places, or things in spirit. All the Father has is thine, always. And this means God can't give humans anything because God isn't withholding anything. The responsibility is placed on the individual to determine if they are sowing to the flesh or to the spirit. The key is found in how we think. Do we think or do we know? Do we think with 5 corporeal senses or are we knowing with the mind of Christ? And here's where we can start to work with the coincidence between the human and the divine. We know all the good, beautiful, and true attributes belong to the divine. And nothing that appears in the corporeal senses is real. Also, we know consciousness is experience. We can't be conscious of divine truth and experience pain, discomfort, sickness, suffering, lack, or limitation, anything without divine quality. Everything becomes contingent on whether we are drawing from duality or from the absolute. And the testimony of the senses is the indicator. We can use just like the check engine light on the dashboard of a car. Without having this sense testimony, there's no way of us knowing what we are conscious of. So now, once you develop this faculty that enables us to perceive the divine creation, and you know the truth, then you are free from the belief in this finite mortal sense of existence. You know the difference if you are doing it with the mortal mind, with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image, as opposed to doing it with divine mind, because divine mind demonstrates. Spirit is a demonstrable principle. It's a law, a rule. And so you use it and make sure what you are calling divine truth is externalizing in experience. This is why the message of the Christ is heal the sick, reform sinner, raise the dead. This is what Jesus called preaching the gospel.
So, Swami, so say you had somebody that said to you, I believe God is all. I understand we are all made in his image, but then they have a pain in their hand or something like that. What would be your instruction to this person?
Well, like we had said, belief is the entry level. We believe in sickness. We believe in suffering. We believe in miracles. This becomes the contradiction. In order for us to demonstrate divine law, we must be pure of heart, which means we have to purge ourselves of all of the contradictory beliefs that are interfering with our ability to be a faithful witness to the divine creation. The beauty of this is you don't stay at belief. You start to prove what you are calling the divine creation is the one true truth. And if it's not demonstrating, then you go back to the drawing board, because what you are calling truth is still concept. It's a thought about it, and you haven't come out of the mind that can't bring forth the divine image, because the entire human experience is a mental image. And for a lot of us, we're not willing to let go of that. The Bible tells us we must put off the old man. And this means health and matter must be given up for health and spirit. This born again of a completely different source of sustenance is a prerequisite to knowing this truth.
So we have this from Proverbs 3:6. I'll read it. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. End of the verse. Your thoughts, please.
God can't do anything for us if we are not conscious of the omnipresence. The practice of consciously converting duality to spirit is what we call spiritualization, acknowledging me in all thy ways. The way we do this is exactly the way Mary Baker Eddy said, to stand porter at the door of thought. We have divine mind. It only knows divine truth. And so anything that does not have divine qualities, which is whole, perfect, changeless, eternal, we know it didn't come from divine mind now. So we treat them differently. They're imposters, intruders. We no longer are reacting to the testimony of the corporeal senses. It's not the end-all be-all. You don't have to believe the doctor when he says X-rays don't lie. They are the lie. The entire human experience is a mental image. But as we evolve in this practice, we start to see the more divinely mental, the more harmonious and indestructible things appear. They're never real. They're always an appearance. And we don't try, we rest.
Swami, thank you for sharing your spiritual insights with us today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Once you're on any of the pages, you scroll down, you'll see several buttons to press that would further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's podcast?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and demonstrate spiritual law. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to the program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.